The traditional territories of the Algonquin people experienced extremely long, brutal, and isolated winters. And during these months, food scarcity was a constant life-threatening danger, and the Wendigo legend is deeply rooted in these harsh geographical and climate realities that were faced by these communities. So the myth's primary function was to maintain the core cultural and social fabric of the community, especially during times of extreme stress. And the concept of the Wendigo served as a potent cultural mechanism for enforcing the absolute taboo against cannibalism. The myth functions as a terrifying cautionary tale, and crossing the line into consuming human flesh, even to survive, was not a criminal act, but an existential disaster that invited spiritual corruption and monstrous transformation. So this spiritual threat provided a necessary check against the intense desperation of famine, teaching that the loss of self, sanity, and humanity to the Wendigo was a fate worse than death by starvation, which prioritized the integrity of the soul and the survival of the community's moral code over individual physical survival. The Wendigo is the perfect personification of the worst aspects of the northern winter: starvation, cold, and isolation. Its very existence served as a mythological explanation for human suffering in the subarctic environment. Its appearance, gaunt, skeletal, and possessing an icy heart, directly mirrors the deadly threat of freezing and famine, transforming these natural phenomena into a conscious, malevolent predator. Furthermore, the creature's insatiable, ever-increasing hunger is a powerful metaphor for the terrifying reality or scarcity where consuming resources, or people, only exacerbates the overall desperate situation. And this myth is unique because it's tied to a historically recognized cultural syndrome, which is known as Wendigo psychosis or Wendigo mania. And this syndrome was documented by early European settlers and ethnographers, and often included the following symptoms in the afflicted person. So one of the symptoms, and it's often the first sign of Wendigo psychosis, the victim developed intense paranoia and the overwhelming, crippling belief that they were not just hungry, but were being actively possessed by the Wendigo spirit itself. And this psychological invasion caused them to see their community members and even their own family not as people, but as potential food sources. And this internal conflict driven by the spirit led to agonizing mental distress and fear that they would lose control, forcing the afflicted individuals to often become completely isolated from the group to protect their loved ones from the monster they felt growing inside them. And there was another core symptom to the spiritual tipping point of transformation, manifesting as an insatiable craving that drives the afflicted person to madness. This overwhelming morbid desire to consume human flesh is often heralded by a preceding and equally disturbing symptom, a complete aversion to normal food. The Wendigo spirit, having begun its possession, twists the host's perception so that common sustenance becomes disgusting and unpalatable, leaving the possessed individual obsessively focused only on the ultimate taboo. This perpetual fruitless hunger is part of the Wendigo's curse. The consumption of human flesh only satisfies the need momentarily, growing the monster larger while simultaneously increasing the host's terrible, ever-gnawing starvation. And the psychological toll of Wendigo possession often led to the tragic final symptom, isolation and depression. The afflicted individual experienced an agonizing internal conflict, knowing the monstrous craving inside them posed a deadly risk to their own family and community, and out of a deep sense of despair and the fear that they would hurt their loved ones, the host would often willingly retreat from the community, fleeing into the lonely frozen wilderness. And this desperate flight, intended to protect others, ironically played right into the Wendigo's hands, as the extreme solitude only intensified the spirit's control and accelerated the final horrifying transformation, leaving the host utterly alone to complete their monstrous fate. In historical cases where a community member displayed signs of Wendigo psychosis, traditional responses were sometimes extreme, as the person was viewed not as merely ill, but as actively transforming into a monstrous threat that needed to be neutralized to protect the group. So the Wendigo myth is less about a physical monster and more about the cultural codification of the fear of moral and spiritual collapse under the dire pressures of starvation and isolation. That being said, there's more to the myth. The Wendigo is terrifying because it functions primarily as a spirit of possession. Its evil manifesting not just as a physical threat, but as a deeply personal internal corruption. It doesn't just attack humans from the outside. It invades and twists the host's mind, taking over their consciousness and warping their most fundamental instincts. So once a person is possessed, they have one singular driven monstrous goal. It's the insatiable craving for human flesh, which I've already discussed. This transformation inevitably forces the host into isolation, compelling them to flee for the safety of their community, not only because they fear being discovered, but because the spirit actively pushes them away from potential victims who are not their own loved ones. This is more to the myth and not why the myth. The Wendigo's physical stature is an exercise in terrifying contradiction. While fundamentally gaunt and skeletal, the creature is often described as possessing a colossal height, sometimes reaching an impossible 15 feet or more, which is weird because if a person is possessed and they're skeletal or gaunt or whatever, their fingers are going to grow longer because they're not going to be taking care of themselves as much. Maybe they're jaundiced and that's why you have that pallid skin look. Maybe their eyes are yellow, And I'm wondering if the reason why a person would view them, size-wise is because of their isolation. It's like shadows, the shadow, they're hiding out in the shadows and whatever else. They could be standing on a stump or a rock or whatever else. From that perspective, these people look taller or bigger or, they're gaunt, so maybe their muscles are taut and showing as strength or whatever else like that. The immense size is rarely a fixed physical reality. It's often a psychological terror perceived more accurately by the victim it is stalking or possessing, while others might only see a gaunt, oddly tall person or sometimes nothing at all. And this spectral variable height underscores the Wendigo status as a being of paranoia and madness. It grows larger, more threatening the closer it gets to breaking the victim's mind, ensuring that the last image that the afflicted person sees is a figure of impossible scale and endless hunger. So maybe their brain is broken or something like that, and all they see inside, what they're seeing in their brain visually is this person that's stalking them, this paranoia that's gripping them. And that thing grows from small to huge, and that's where they think they're being possessed. The core visual of the Wendigo lies in a horrifying paradox, and despite its reputation for consuming endless amounts of human flesh, its form is one of utter emaciation. I've already said this. The Wendigo is described as being severely gaunt and skeletal, with skin stretched so tightly over bones that its silhouette is terrifyingly thin. In some of the coldest traditions, the skeletal form is said to be composed of rotten, perpetually freezing flesh or even solid ice, reflecting the deadly bitter winter from which it was born. This skeletal appearance reinforces the creature's curse. It's the personification of endless, unquenchable famine. The horrifying sensory detail often reported by those who survived an encounter is the smell of decay. Due to its diet of human flesh and its perpetual skeletal state of decomposition, as it's both feeding and simultaneously starving, the Wendigo often carries an overpowering stench of rot, decay, and death, and this foul, morbid scent is so intense that it can betray the creature's presence long before its massive gaunt form is ever seen. In the silent, frozen wilderness, this unnatural aroma of the grave serves as a critical final warning to the hunter that they have entered the domain of the ultimate predator. There's also a connection between the Wendigo and the harsh climate, and it's chillingly embodied by its icy physiology. The Wendigo is definitively a spirit of the frozen north, and this is reflected in its very core. Its heart is often depicted as being made of solid ice. The detail is crucial because it makes the creature immune to conventional weapons and reinforces its profound emotional detachment. Also, its breath carries the bone-chilling cold of the deepest winter. It's a supernatural cold that can instantly freeze water or inflict frostbite. And this supernatural cold is both a weapon and a reminder of the spirit's origins, confirming that the Wendigo is literally a personification of the deadly, relentless, and unforgiving cold that dominates the Algonquin winter landscape. The most crucial weakness of the Wendigo is directly linked to its own icy physiology, offering the only effective countermeasure known in the legends, because the creature is fundamentally a spirit of the frozen north with a heart depicted as being made of solid ice. It is intensely vulnerable to heat. The only known way to truly kill a possessed Wendigo, and in some traditions free the human soul, is to expose the creature completely to intense heat and fire. And this process requires overwhelming the spirit's icy nature until its heart melts. And this reliance on fire reinforces the Wendigo's status as a spirit born of winter and starvation, whose demise requires the concentrated life-giving power of heat generated by human survival. There you go. More interesting facts about the Wendigo that I didn't provide in the first video, and a little bit of a myth conception, if you want to call it that. Like it if you like it. Like, subscribe, and comment. Have a great day.